Greetings and welcome back, everyone, to another quick little lore video here, at least quicker than a couple of the others, as I just wanted to touch this week on a theory that I've had sitting around really since I've read a specific lore page in the Brave articles that we received, like the Brave lore pages that we received that were labeled Two Old Friends. Now, the theory that I have sitting around that's being slowly reinforced as I make my way through the newer that we receive through the Chirality lore pages, I've begun to have more reason to believe that this could be something that occurs in our future. Maybe not our near future, but there's definitely some inklings occurring that the city that we defend is starting to split once again, in terms of ideology, in terms of demands, desires, and just their stance on us as guardians. Now, the first page that really kind of sparked this for me in the book that's labeled Two Old Friends is specifically page 11. It was labeled Article, a Consensus for the Rest of Us. Now, in this, so I'll read it here in a second just so you guys understand kind of where I'm coming from. This gives kind of the first inkling to me that there are strong opinions of the Guardians starting to arise in the city while we've been fighting all of these threats that have now leaked their way into the city at this point. When we were going through Onslaught and into the Light, we were defending the last city. We were being attacked at our home base, which could have been the catalyst for this, but ironically in these, what seems to be another catalyst is promises made in the past by Ikora that seem to have gone unfulfilled, for lack of a better term, for the humans of the last city, as this seems to be much more focused down into specific factions of Guardians, as we'll see in the Chirality pages that I'll touch on, but primarily the humans in the Brave book, Two Old Friends. So, to give you that initial idea that I had received, the article, A Consensus for the Rest of Us, reads as follows. By Leia Terrasis, political correspondent at the City Herald. Chibuike Otieno, Parika Kozar, Argus McCowan. If there's anything the current slate of consensus hopefuls have in common, it's that they offer a very different kind of representation for the mortal population of the last city. Raucous political gatherings have become a staple of the city's nightlife in recent months, with political candidates vying for the chance to make their case for candidacy in the city's parks and public squares. Chief among their demands is the urgent restoration of the fair representation to the city's government. Notably absent are the old trappings of long-established faction loyalties. This move away from Guardian-driven factions speaks to a more mortal-centric framing, claims Dina Palomo. One of several enthusiastic volunteers campaigning on behalf of McCowan, we know the Vanguard can handle the long view, but we need the short-term perspective as well as the immortal one. Warlock Vanguard Ikora Ray has repeatedly pledged to restore the consensus, promising to hold civilian elections once the immediate threat is over. Not everyone is content to wait. How many citizens were exiled from the city because they got on Executor Hideo's bad side? Asks one local. I mean, how many Guardians got the boot because they wanted Guardians ruling the city? Isn't that what we have now? If things are so desperate, why don't we invite some of our people back home? Others call the excitement over elections premature. If we lose the war, I'm pretty sure none of us are going to be alive to do any voting. It is difficult to argue the point that the election turnout might be poor under the current circumstances, but if the lightless members of our community are to have a voice in the future, it's clear that there are those ready and eager to speak. Now, with this page, this obviously exemplifies that separation within the mortal population of the city, that some are wanting to have their representation now, as Ikora has promised, and they're not content with waiting on this immediate threat to leave, as they may be seeing it as the Guardians begin to see it, that there are always threats on the horizon to the city, to the Guardians, to Earth, so the immediate threat will never be gone. It will never be an absent presence within our lives as we know it, as we seem to just constantly have more and more threats, more and more dangers. We just finished off The Witness after this very long, arduous, decade-long, saga, and we're immediately jumping into the threats that have occurred from this spillage of light and dark out of the Traveler. So this just further exemplifies that this immediate threat is never absent. Now, moving even further into that, I wanted to take a minute to focus on the mention towards the end of, if things are so desperate, why don't we invite some of our people back home? Now, this worries me on two occasions because for those of you that are lore heads and have seen those secret areas that seem to have been a Concordat hiding place within the tower and within specifically the Hall of Champions that Shaxx had erected and allowed us access to during the Into the Light portion of the story here, it seems that someone was hiding out. They had a map, they had, food, they had a place to stay. But it also seems that from the Skimmer's lore, we understand that the Skimmer was gifted to the city by a Concordat individual. Now, the only one that any of us could connect this to is Lysander, and I do have a worry that this is, again, pointing to maybe inviting Lysander back into the city after his exile. It would be very, very carefully done, I assume, but the only reason I say that is because there is another article in the Two Old Friends that speaks of a transcript between an individual, Honor Mahal, and a field agent of the Hidden. Now, Honor Mahal is a very niche individual in the lore. They once again connect back to the Drifter, which of course is something that I felt was necessary to leave out of my previous Drifter video because it doesn't have an intense impact on the story as we know it. It had more impact back in Forsaken when Drifter's arrival was imminent, and we had lots of preservations among the Vanguard and among the Guardians with Drifter's arrival, the use of Taken and Gambit to kill other Guardians, and just his actions overall. Honor Mahal is very, very skeptical of Drifter's presence. They do not like Drifter. They think he is inherently evil, and they have been keeping an eye on him since he arrived. They are a part of the Praxic Order of things, which are a group of warlocks that were founded alongside the last city, and their whole purpose is keeping artifacts related to the darkness out of Guardians' hands to prevent any corruption of that Guardian. They are the ones who were pretty much responsible for hunting down the Shadows of Yore and the Dredgens, and they still do that to this day. Honor Mahal is also a part of Ikora's Hidden and is an agent of the Hidden, so they are at Ikora's bidding somewhat in terms of making sure certain tasks are handled in the dark. But this transcript, and it's on page 8 of the same Two Old Friends book, reads through a very short transcript that simply just identifies that Mahal is speaking to an agent that's disguised as a Titan that seems to not be having the best stroke of luck, but they're trying to solidify some form of deal. And it seems to be with an arms dealer, because towards the end, Mahal states, "I'd rather deal with incompetent armed dealers than the reverse." And the agent states, "You and me both, ma'am." Now, from that, with getting that initial introduction to the theory itself, where it sparked from, and how to, process those initial feelings of a possible split occurring within the city, similar to the factions we had with, Dead Orbit and Future War Cult and New Monarchy. But having it centered more around mortals versus Guardians, it does scare me in small areas just simply because of my theory runs along with the fact that we may have returned to a fractured civilization, a fractured last city, and some of the quarrels that we may face coming soon are with our own people. The chirality pages do seem to push this a little more for me, simply because as reading through, within the first couple of pages that I've made it to, it seems that there is even a growing pain in the side of the Guardians and their philosophies, and we're beginning to see more and more like hypocrites. With that initial page, we see that Ikora has made promises that she has not fulfilled. There is an empty space for the mortals, and they feel that they have been forgotten. Now, furthermore, in chirality, on page 2, there is a page labeled Symmetry. I've only made it about 3 pages into this book, along with all of the additional stuff we've been doing with the new season, new episode. But this page reads as follows. Excerpt from a VanNet letter to Ikora Ray. Sender multiply anonymized over relays. The symmetrists, even still, are viewed as something from the edges of society. City regulations hold that our philosophies are dangerous to permit, though guardians in prominent positions or public blood sport are less reserved than ever about using darkness-based abilities, happy to wield stasis without a second thought. I write today to suggest that, should the consensus be reformed, or some other non-military governing body be formed of a representative portion of the city, the Symmetry and its students and followers ought to not only be included, but embraced. The Praxic Order may have their duty to combat darkness all they want, but basing political and military positions on the fever dreams of one warlock, yes, I speak here of the Pujari position, is misguided at best. Since when have dreams been acceptable testimony, save perhaps from the speaker? If you wish to tell me that Pujari was in direct communication with the traveler, you will have to bear the due burden of proof in its entirety. It is more clear that the idea of darkness as a morally evil force without room for compromise is hopelessly outdated, and policy must be revised. Does a shadow have any moral attributes because it may obscure where we are going? Is the sunshine inherently good because it illuminates a path? They are both required to delineate one from the other. And even if they did carry intention, if the blotting out of the sun every night was an act of unspeakable evil, such concepts as good and evil are still defined by their relationship to each other. What is evil? It is not good. Light and darkness, the paracausal forces known to the traveler and the witness, these are not as simple to define as the sun and shadow. But an understanding of darkness is required no matter if one chooses to remain immersed in the light or balance both. Refusal to accept that understanding will forever render that truth unclear. If light ever truly defeated darkness, that defeat would be our fate too. Our best hope lies in understanding darkness and its balance to light, in seeking the perfect symmetry that will right our universe. Perhaps you will read this as cultist devotion to a deceased figurehead. Perhaps there is no convincing anyone that Ulantown was undoubtedly right. But I digress. In purely practical, non-debatable matters, public attitudes toward darkness and its forces no longer match long-held city positions about the symmetry. I would see our theories and teachings be made publishable, our adherents welcome to the table where the end of all things is addressed. When you are ready to open further dialogue, signal the philosopher's message board. I am sure you are already monitoring. Now, with that page, it refers back to the consensus, which is the mortal political group that seems to be forming in order to have the city's mortal population be in consensus with the rest of the Guardians and be accounted for. This is now saying that if we're going to include the mortals, we have to include the symmetrists as well. Now, the symmetrists, whenever they mention the Pujari position and Ulantan, what they're simply referring to is that Pujari was a warlock that had the position that darkness is inherently evil and we must avoid it at all costs. We should not be experimenting with it, we should not test with it, we should not touch it. It will turn us evil if we become even interested in attempting to understand it. Whereas Ulantan had the position that darkness is not inherently evil and we must learn to balance things as so the universe continues. The universe is all about balance and duality. You cannot have light without dark, you cannot have good without evil. So the symmetrists are simply on Ulantan's side in terms of duality and what they believe to be symmetry. making sure to have equality of the two as the universe does. So that is just the briefest rundown I can give of the Pujari position versus Ulantan's position on the utilization of darkness and how we understand it and proceed in life with it. Now, obviously, this is also pointing to the fact that the Pujari position is ignored. They have seen Guardians wield stasis and possibly even Strand in the Crucible without any second thought, without any thought of remorse of using it. So the Symmetrists are claiming here that we have obviously done away with Pujari's position on the darkness, and so they are vindicated even more to have a position within the table of conversation that if we are to bring the mortals to the table at the Vanguard, then we must bring them as well in order to have an equal representation across the board. Now, for me, though, this seems to start to show the begins of those cracks in the surface. The split between not only mortals, but guardians, and the opinions starting to arise again here, similar to how Dead Orbit, Future War Cult, and New Monarchy did. They all had separate opinions, and they all had separate ideologies that led them into the path of never agreeing with one another. Now, this may not be as detrimental, simply because we're talking about Guardians' positions versus humans being involved, and they're not necessarily of the same vein, but what I see as a common issue within these two pages, and possibly even further once I make it through the rest of the lore cards and possibly finding more, is that there is a general consensus that the Guardians are being hypocritical, and that the Guardians are not thinking outside of themselves. We are seemingly isolated in these ideologies away from these individuals. We are a separate entity of ourselves. We are not necessarily the enemy as of yet with reading these, but we are definitely not on the same side. They see us as the opposite, the one that they need to convince, the one that they need to speak out to, the one that they need to wrangle in, because we're too focused on fighting anything and everything that could be in our way and could be an immediate threat, instead of focusing on the city. And this is where, like I said, at the current moment, it's just a theory, and it's just a back burner theory to keep in mind that the city may be fractured. I absolutely hope that there will not be a time that we have to make a decision of facing off against mortals within Destiny's history, as it would be an impossible choice. It would be just heartbreaking, but also I don't think I would be able to come to a decision to actually fight mortals in any capacity, because knowing as a guardian that you have a ghost that can bring you back versus, you know, standing on the other side of someone who you know that as soon as you do any damage, that damage is permanent. That damage is not able to be just wiped clean from the slate. But this is where I kind of sit in terms of what is going on with the last city, what we might see in the future, whether it's within Echoes or past Echoes. But I do hope that this only stays a theory. Hopefully, you know, there is no fighting of humans, and maybe we'll see some more factions arise. Maybe we'll have to talk to some symmetrists, some of the consensus, some of the political figureheads we've seen here. I don't know how interesting that might be for Destiny's community. I feel like, obviously, with Dead Orbit, Future War Cult, it has evolved since D1 and what we know of them, with, of course, finding out about Maya, Lakshmi 2 being the leader of the Future War Cult this late into the future, and that really changed the meaning and the impact of the Future War Cult as we know it. But let me know what you guys think of the theory. Let me know if you guys share the same sentiment I do. What would you like to see if the city were to split into factions again, or maybe even what you think could end up happening in our story, just with this city fracturing away from Guardians more and more, even after our victory within the Pale Heart. I'll be looking in the comments, excited to see your guys' ideas, but I hope you guys enjoyed this little bit of a shorter video. I've been pretty busy with the First Descendant and trying that game out, since Echoes is kind of on a back burner for now for about another week or so until we get any new content with Act 2. So, if you guys want to see content on that, please let me know. It may not be lore focused content, it may be more just my thoughts and opinions on the game. But other than that, I hope to see you guys in the next one, and I will be looking out for you in the comments.